Okay, and with that, we're going to progress to asking questions. So let's take the first question from the audience. Someone have a question? It's always the pressure of being the first person. Any questions from the web yet?
There is one.
Okay. Could you use the microphone?
It's a short question to Velson. Someone wants to know if it's possible for conservators based in Asia to become accredited also.
I'll leave it to Alison Richmond to talk. If you would give it.
Thank you very much. Alison Richmond, Chief Executive of ICON. I'd like to answer that question by saying that, yes, it is, in theory. And in practice, we have accredited a conservator in Canada. And we are in the process of hopefully accrediting some conservators in Singapore, although we don't have the results from that yet. So I don't want to be too say that too clearly. But yes, indeed, it is possible. So if somebody is interested in becoming accredited through the PACR scheme, they would be best to contact ICON.
Do you have any other questions? Yes.
Why is the accreditation process so long? Because one of the women I worked with, she's like...
Sorry, could you hang on a moment? We can't hear you down here.
I was just wondering why the accreditation process is such a long process. Because, I mean, one of the women I was working with is excellent, but she's not accredited at all.
Depends what you mean by long. What do you mean do you mean from when you become trained to when you get accredited, or from when you start the process of applying for accreditation?
No, she's a professional paper conservator, but she's not accredited. And
How do you know she's professional?
she's the head of an institution.
Sorry?
Get your hands.
But there's a profession.
She just told me because it takes such a elongated process.
There are two things. First of all, a profession is really quite narrowly defined. It can be a really general term. I'm a professional, or it can be that you comply with professional standards. Now, ICON has produced a PACR which has professional standards, and if you become a professional by those standards, in the same way if you become a professional doctor or engineer or architect, you comply with professional standards. All of those require quite a rigorous assessment method, and that takes time. It takes time to come up to the standards. It takes time to document that you've come up to those standards. It takes time for people to assess whether your documentation and your practice actually comes up to those standards. That's why it takes so long. That's why it costs so much. And I can tell you, ICON is far, far cheaper than most other professions. Most of the work is given voluntarily by the other members of the profession. Other professions, you try to become a doctor, you won't do it for the price you get. You become a professional conservator. That's why it takes long. It's done by volunteers. That's why it's expensive, why it costs, because we actually have to go through the rigorous examination. So you can do it the short way, you can do it the shortcut, and you can call yourself a professional, but you aren't.
Yep. Just leading on from that point. Oh, I'm Liz Ralph from Camberwell. Would there be a possibility in the future, now that education is becoming much more expensive, to integrate accreditation or some of the points of accreditation into the curriculum for conservation? Because after paying for your course, for your 3-year course or your MA or whatever, then you go on to have to pay for accreditation, which of course is a great thing. Could it possibly be combined so that you start off slightly earlier with more input?
Can I, this is Elizabeth Pye, UCL, can I comment on that? We try to incorporate elements of accreditation in our training. In fact, in our final year, we actually get people to use the standards as set out by ICON for accreditation and to measure themselves, and we use them as well, to measure themselves against those standards. Now, I'm a great believer in there being a period after finishing training before applying for accreditation, because consolidating your knowledge and your skills and your confidence as well is very important. But the way we try to prepare students is to give them a flavour of what they're aiming to achieve, and actually ask, I mean, I've just revamped part of what we do for our final year students, and I've asked them to consider what they need to do to get themselves from the position they're in now to what's called expert on the scheme as presented by ICON. So that doesn't quite incorporate accreditation, but it gives them a leg up for accreditation.
I'll just carry on with that. For none of the professions is education enough. A profession is someone who practices the profession, and until you can demonstrate that you can practice professionally, you cannot be given the freedom, essentially, to practice without supervision. So you become a professional by practicing the activity, and when you've demonstrated that you can practice the activity proficiently, you can become a professional. There are quite a few people who are really quite good academically in a field and never make the grade as professionals because they cannot practice professionally for one reason or another. They may be really, really good at craft work, but they don't have the professional aspects. So, and I've seen this happen. So that is why there's a period of assessment, self-assessment, assessment by your peers, and eventually assessment by the profession itself. So there has to be this time of growth. As you can see from the diagram, the growth from wherever you leave off the training, and then you actually have to prove that you can do it, prove to yourself and others that you can do it competently, at least proficiently, if not expert.
Could I just also add, from a museum point of view, conservation department, that most enlightened museums will give staff time to actually undertake accreditation, and I even actually pay for people in my department to go through the accreditation process as well. And it's worthwhile, if you are working in your organisation after you've graduated and worked your way through, to actually talk to your HR, Human Resources department, to see whether they will actually pay for this, and you may be surprised that they will.
And it's tax deductible.
I just had a comment on that as well. My name is Rebecca Schindel, and I attend Northumbria University's conservation program. I do paper conservation. And as an international student, American conservators don't have an accreditation process. So for perhaps other international students, and I can't obviously speak for everyone, having the ICON British accreditation system worked into the education process might actually not be as helpful for us if we intend on going back to our original countries. It might in the long run, but I think it shouldn't be looked at as like a British thing. I think we either need to overall integrate some kind of accreditation worldwide, or it just seems a bit confusing. I don't know.
Can I comment from the point of view of having said that we incorporate this into our training course? Our student body is entirely international. We have actually more students from overseas than from the UK very often. But I think that these standards are useful universally. And if people have thought about where they are now and how they will achieve acceptance into the conservation profession, whether there's formal accreditation or not, that gives you something to aim for. It gives you a shape that you can work on yourself in the future.
I agree.
Even though, you know, I know that accreditation has been, or establishing accreditation has been problematic in other parts of the world.
I think that's right. I would say that I think the standards are excellent, and we shouldn't obviously not teach according to those standards. But I wouldn't agree with them being taught specifically as you have to learn these accreditation processes as part of your education.
No, that's not what I mean.
Right.
No,
right.
we're not. No, it's a way of showing people how, you know, what is the profession. What's the profession's concept of a professional conservator? What are you aiming for? Right. It may be expressed slightly differently in different contexts, but basically I don't think most professional conservators would disagree with the sentiment of these standards.
And perhaps maybe we just need to educate incoming students that there may be further expenses and of all of the training processes that may be required to become a professional conservator. And that might ease the problem on students discovering it suddenly, or I don't know.
This is IIC meeting, International Institute of Conservation, and so I was wearing an icon hat for a moment there. Perhaps I shouldn't. But IIC, I sit around the table with some of the top the fellows of IIC, and we are all more or less the same sort of professionals. We have our individualnesses, but we all have the same idea of standards, of quality. So the qualities of a good professional are the same all over the world. The route by which you get there is different in different parts of the world. But what we put into place in the ICON PACR process is, as Liz says, fairly universally accepted. And you cannot teach two accreditation processes, because actually, if you work to a process to become a professional, you're not professional. You haven't got the adaptability. And that's one of the things about being the professional. Another one.
Hello, Velson. I've got a question on Twitter saying, how should organisations such as the CAPC, AIC and ICROM get buy-in for accreditation from those practising in the field? I think she means already practising.
It's really difficult culturally. There are very different cultural expectations of how professions work in different cultures. And so the British, and it is really quite an interesting study, as I had to do for a while, of what different professions, how different professions are seen by themselves and by the society. And different cultures have different professions, and there has to be an acceptance of the professionals themselves, of the profession themselves in each country, that it is worth the candle. We in Britain compared ourselves with the other professions in this country, and we said to our own internal, examining our navels, we're as good as they are. They're paid more than us. They're respected more than us. But we're as good as them. What do we need to establish parity? In our own minds, our own self-respect, and also in respect of other people. We therefore went for this, and it was accepted, and it took probably 15 or 20 years development for that process of self-learning, self-evaluation to happen. Other countries have been through this and have had, and have not come to that conclusion. Now, that may be a lack of will. It may be that they have a completely different culture, a different attitude to their own self-worth, and they don't consider themselves in that category of professionalism. I think if you don't have something to judge yourself by, there will be slippage of standards, and as I say, it will lead to a tale of very poor practice. Sorry, and a dream that I have. I would like, and I haven't started doing it yet. When we get the finances of IIC sorted out, I want to somehow get together a way of collaborating and coordinating the professionalization efforts of different countries. There's the ECHO standards, there's the PACR standards, which are divergent. There are other potential professional standards that are available, and I think there is a piece of work that needs to be done to bring those together. But it took 15 years in the UK. It's going to be a generational change worldwide. So you can do it.
Carol Peacock. I've just come to the end of an ICON HLF internship at the British Museum. I'd just like to ask what the panel's opinions are about the number of student conservators that are coming out of various training courses, particularly now when there is such a dearth of jobs, and how student conservators should approach applying for jobs which are also being applied for by far more experienced conservators who rightly have a lot of experience in their fields and because of the current climate have lost their jobs, and how we should approach placements, often voluntary placements in institutions where conservators are losing their jobs. Sorry.
Ouch.
If I could start off the panel's discussion on that, very good question. I too feel, personally speaking, that there are too many courses producing too many conservators, and there's a glut of conservation students compared to the amount of jobs that are going available. And I think that has been the situation even when we've not got this current financial climate. And this is why I posed the question that there perhaps needs to be a strategic look at conservation education, and certainly ICON, and I don't know whether, Alison, you're talking about this tomorrow, but yeah, our professional body is looking at this through its educational strategy document. I don't know what the answer is. From the end user point of view, we are faced with the situation where we advertise very rare jobs and we get several hundred applications. A lot of those we can quite often disregard because they're just people speculatively trying to go for a conservation job and they have absolutely no experience whatsoever. But I do sympathise with you students trying to go for jobs currently. We're just about to advertise one, and it'd be interesting to see how many people we get for this one. But from an end user point of view, there's not a great deal we can do. We have to go on merit for each of the jobs that are advertised. The only thing I would say is sometimes for some of our jobs that are advertised, we don't want somebody with 30 years experience quite often. We want somebody fresh with new ideas straight from college. So although we do go on merit, sometimes I say the fact that we've got fresh ideas from students coming from colleges is a bonus for us. But the other thing I'd just like to finish off by saying is I think the current financial climate and the dearth of jobs at the moment is a low point, and my view is it can only get better.
Yeah. I think that it is a very real problem that you've brought up, and it's a problem that's always concerned me. Actually, I've been in the UK at Camberwell now for about 3.5 years. One of the problems, and I don't know whether you have that at UCL, is that there's tremendous pressure on the universities to recruit numbers, because if you don't recruit a certain number of students, the courses are simply not viable. And one of the things that's becoming, and this is going to become an increasing problem with conservation courses, is that in the past, certainly at the University of the Arts, the conservation courses have been to a certain extent subsidised, and they've been subsidised because of the large subsidies given particularly to undergraduate programs. Now, as you're all probably aware, by 2012, those subsidies will be completely gone, so that the only money coming into the university, directly into the university, will be directly the student fees. So the university is, I'm sorry, this is a bit long-winded, but it means the university is no longer prepared to subsidise conservation courses. I know sometimes for students at Camberwell, it seems improbable that the courses are being heavily subsidised, but of course because the fees are so high, but then the fees have to go to things like to libraries, IT, administration, the kit the actual space that you're occupying. So I do think it is a very real problem that we are taking too many students in relationship to the number of jobs that are out there. And like you were saying, it's not just a recent phenomena, it's a general phenomena. And you've raised, I'm not going to even pretend to try and address it, but I think you've raised an extremely interesting ethical issue too, and that's the whole issue of students taking unpaid work. Because it is extraordinary now, isn't it? When you look at the cons dis list and you're reading a job and you think, oh, that sounds really interesting, and then at the bottom it says this is a volunteer position. So I think that is a very big kind of ethical issue, which I'm sorry I'm not really answering, but I do absolutely agree with you. The only positive thing to be said sometimes about the big number of students that go through is that not everybody might specifically want to take a conservation route. They might want to go into different forms of, say for instance, a lot of conservators end up going into collection management, so that even though you might have trained in a specialism, you might go into a wider aspect of it.
Can I add to that too? I mean, I think these are important questions. We've always tried to keep our student numbers in balance as far as we can, but for exactly that reason. But it is true that universities are under a huge pressure to increase student numbers, particularly in this day and age. We also attract very international students, and many of whom, almost all of them, go back to jobs in their home countries. So the number of students we're producing for jobs in this country is comparatively small, or it's a smaller proportion. The question of volunteers, I think that is, or voluntary posts as it were, I think that is also a very important question. But one thing I would say is that there's never really been the capacity to employ as many conservators as museums would like to employ, particularly outside the major national museums. And volunteers have always played an important role, or in many museums have played an important role. It is different now, I agree, when people perhaps are losing jobs, but I think you gain, if you gain useful experience. It gives you a way of deciding what you want to do in the future. Is this the kind of conservation you want to do or not? We used to have the same kind of question when there, and this still happens, with short-term jobs, maternity cover jobs. Are these useful career development stages? For, I'd have questions from students. Is it useful to take up a 6-month post? What happens to me after 6 months? Which is a perfectly reasonable question. I've always said go for it, because you learn a lot in that 6 months. You may decide that's not the kind of conservation you want to do next time round. You're not tied to it, you can move on. Now, I mean, there are ethical problems about the voluntary side and when people are losing their jobs, but I would just say to all of you, have a go at taking on whatever you can.
Can I just say something
sorry.
to this subject? I just would say in book conservation you have this issue that there's so much work there. I find that the work that people do that come out of training wouldn't endanger my job, because I can do more. So I would still get work on the more specific problems and bigger projects. And actually I do look for volunteers who are happy to do some work experience for little or no money, because I know they will learn, and then it's for them the first step to get into, and a few more books will be repaired, which will never be dealt with, because there's so endless amounts of objects that need the help or treatment. And so I would encourage to take on voluntary work.
We'll take a question online first.
I don't. There.
Did you want to comment? I think
We've got a question online for request for practical suggestions for students wanting to initiate their career after finishing training. And volunteering is simply impossible for students, particularly mature students who are supporting a family. And we've had another student saying very few conferences and short courses are affordable for students. How can we expand our knowledge if we're unable to afford these? I think they want practical suggestions rather than sympathy.
There are actually a number of grant-giving bodies that you can go to, certainly in England that I'm aware of, and I'm sure in many other countries, that would be very willing to support conferences for volunteers. I could name several in England, but perhaps not in this forum now. But
Can I add something that I've quite often advised students to say, well, look, can I come if I help? You know, if I'm willing to take microphones around, as we're seeing here, you know, serve tea or whatever it is. So sometimes, you know, getting perhaps a reduced fee for a conference at least.
Hi, my name's Hannah Clare and I'm a preventive conservator at the National Archives at the moment, and I was wanting, it's not a very formulated question, but I was wanting to know what your views on specialism were and how concerned we should be about it this early in our careers. I know a lot of you have talked about where you began and how you have actually managed to switch about quite a lot, but I'm finding it quite difficult to switch, and I just wondered what your views were on that.
not quite sure the microphone's working or not.
These microphones only work on the web, so
Yeah.
So you should go on the web at the back.
I think it was a very interesting question, because what you're saying is you're currently working as a preventive conservator, but you are also concerned about getting a job, and you see jobs advertised that have got a specialism, and how much you should be doing a specialism, and how much you should, and what the
get pigeonholed into a certain aspect of the profession, and how easy is it to kind of come from that?
Yes, because it is quite interesting, isn't it, when you look at people's professional careers, and often you see people who've had a really successful career, and they've partially had a successful career as well as being a really good conservator, but they've got a niche kind of position. They're either someone who's specialised in papyrus, or there's a wonderful conservator who's specialised just in doing globes. And so obviously that ensures that the person is going to have some ongoing job. I suppose it's a question really of asking yourself what it is that you really like doing, because Elizabeth underscored the thing, and of course I'd underscore that of the profound importance of preventive conservation. But preventive conservation is obviously really important in a specialism, because if you're doing, say, photographic conservation, you've still got to have a really wide knowledge of preventive conservation. So in terms of, because I think a lot of the jobs, because I'm always looking at the jobs for students, a lot of the jobs now are preventive conservation. They do ask for preventive conservation. But I think, in terms of kind of answering you, is I think that, I mean, are there particular specialisms that you're really passionate about and are interested in?
Well, I was really wondering about, quite often when you speak to people, they seem to have started off in one area, say textiles, for example, and then at some point in their career something else has come along and they've been able to go in a different direction. And I don't really know how realistic that is anymore, or whether you see it as a problem or not a problem, and also whether there is a difference between museums and archives, and so whether you can actually, when you're this early in your career, whether you can pigeonhole yourself into, basically you seal your fate almost into going in a particular direction. Not that I'm saying that it's fate of any sort, but...
If I may, again, it's experience from the past, but I see it from younger people coming up through the profession now. If you see yourself as pigeonholed, you're pigeonholed. As soon as you see that what you're doing is conservation, and you're doing those bits that enthuse you, in the main, there's sufficient, in most jobs, there's sufficient flexibility to branch out. Very few jobs actually have 40 hours a week define. And if you show, if this is in employment, if you show that you have skills and abilities and enthusiasm to go slightly outside, you can, like amoeba-like, just sort of put the tentacles out and then bud out another skill. And of course, you don't have to do this only in work. We had a discussion about 25 years ago, why will no one ever publish conservation? And as I said, I would never allow someone at work to do writing until they'd already produced a paper. I want to see some demonstrated ability before I let them do it. And they can do that in their own time. If someone's enthusiastic, they'll do it till 2 o'clock in the morning.
Certainly at the Museum of London, as you know, Hannah, because you're placement with us there, we try and give the interns a full, broad aspect of training as part of the internship or placement, and that enables the student at the end to go out with a multiplicity of skills that enables them to go for a number of jobs. My recommendation always has been to students is not to pigeonhole yourself too soon in your career, because there are always going to be opportunities in years to come to then branch out. Whereas if you go down one line, then it's very difficult, from what I've seen, for those people to actually change jobs to another specialisation. It's quite a jump, for example, say going down textile conservation route and then suddenly deciding you want to become a metals conservator. It would be almost impossible. Yeah.
Hello, I've got another Twitter question. Do you think that conservation should only be taught at postgraduate level, as this is becoming increasingly the case? The Camberwell course is closing soon. What advice do you give to someone interested in getting into conservation without an undergraduate degree?
Very interesting question. I've found this quite a fascinating subject over the last few years because of the nature of the courses that are existing, and I flashed up some of the courses earlier on that we've taken them from. And some of the courses are at undergraduate level, others are at MSc level. And if you are looking outside at those courses and what they provide, it could be construed as being very complex, because some of the master's levels, for example, you're getting 1 year, some courses you're getting 1 year of theory and another placement with practical. Some undergraduate courses are providing 3 years of theory and practical, but one's undergraduate, one's master's, which is why I was saying in my presentation, it's very difficult from an end user point of view to know what we're getting from students, because the courses are, some of them are changing from undergraduate to master's for a variety of reasons, and it therefore, I say, you get some courses that are very difficult to compare with others.
Let me just say, the number of courses, the courses that are available provide for a very, very small number of specialisms. There's a huge mass of stuff out there which is not dealt with under the courses. So if you wanted, at least a few years ago, to become a natural history conservator, you couldn't possibly have done a conservation course. You would have to have done some form of apprenticeship in a museum, in natural history as a technician or something like that, in a natural history museum, and work your way up and worm yourself into the conservation department or whatever. So if you have a passion for something, you do it in that area. Fortunately, the PACR process allows for that professionalism, if it's gained, to be recognised. Where there is nothing that's been codified, such as the painting conservation or archaeological conservation, well codified, it's been going years, everyone knows how to do it, you go through this course and everyone knows what's expected. In other fields, no one has defined what's expected, no one's defined what you do, it has to be invented. for some course, for some disciplines, no one has even started the process. So a lot of these things have to be invented and they have to evolve. And that's how, and you have to choose a non-traditional route. If you try to get into painting conservation or archaeological conservation without it, you're at a hard job because you're competing against something that has an established route.
Alison Richmond, ICON. I just wanted to go back to the thorny issue of unpaid volunteer work and wondered whether it might be useful, I don't know whether the panel agrees, whether it would be useful to define internships and student placements that happen when students are actually on courses, distinguish between an internship, which might be from 6 to, say, 12 months or a year or 2 years, to a short student placement when students are actually on courses. And also to the idea of unpaid volunteer work. It might be helpful to think about internships and student placements as real learning experiences, real development experiences, whereas unpaid volunteer work could be not so developmental. I mean, it could be that you're just chipping in. So I just wondered whether the panel had any thoughts on how we might come to an agreement as a profession about distinguishing between these sort of 3 areas.
Oh, yeah. I just have one example of one option how it could be dealt with. We just had one project where it was about preparation for a move for a library, and there was box making to be done, which is at first you learn to make your boxes, but then it's very repetitive. But we couldn't pay the students, but we could tie it into teaching. And so we started a collaboration with a course, private conservators, and these students. And it was unpaid work, but became part of their curriculum. And in this way, like, if you can, when you ask them to do work which isn't paid, then at least give them more experience than they would just gain from making the boxes. I think this could be a way of paying back. Because in a way it's paid because it's time of the people who organize the project or work at the institution anyway. So I guess if that could be more emphasized and people are more aware of that and have things ready they could teach ad hoc, I think that would be very helpful.
Can I just comment on Alison Richmond's point about some way of defining internships? When we were developing our internship structure here, I mean, incorporating an internship into our master's courses, I was also at the same time involved in a scheme in this country, in the UK, which was developing what were then called graduate apprenticeships. They died almost as soon as they started, but the exercise in defining those was extremely useful, and much of it was translatable into defining an internship. And we have quite a tight definition of what we expect in an internship, of both us and the student, as well as what we ask of the internship host. And we provide this as a sort of structured document, and it's helped us a lot to understand what we're trying to do. And I think from comments that some of our internship hosts have said, it's also been quite useful as a kind of model, and that could be extended. And I don't take entire credit for it because the graduate apprenticeships set me on the way. So there is that kind of model. I would like to add at that stage reiterate how important the involvement of the internship hosts is. I was very touched to see that several of the students in Rob's slides were actually our student interns, which was really nice to see. Can I just also say a little bit about the question of why are we trying to train people at master's level? I think maybe my introduction to what's kind of driven me in my career as a teacher. And much of it has been to try and raise the status of conservation, and it does. Well, my view is that at least some training should be at master's level, because it does convey a status in terms of ability of attainment and so on. And I, having worked for a long time with, starting with undergraduates and moving on to postgraduate training, I do think the quality of the student input and output at master's level is really excellent, and I'm really pleased about that. And I think that feeds into the profession.
I also think that as courses are being cut, it kind of makes sense probably to run courses at postgraduate level. And one of the decisions of Camberwell to cut undergraduate provision was that those courses went recruiting as well as the postgraduate courses. But just coming back to Alison's thing about the like the paid and unpaid issue, because I think probably a distinction needs to be made between internships that are post graduation and internships that are part of the training. And of course, because when I was running the FTA, which had a very formal, this was for book conservation, it had a very formal work placement of 12 weeks in total, which was a fantastic generosity of museums to give that time. So there'd been no expectation either on the institution's part or the students' part that would be in any way paid. But I think the difficulty comes when students have graduated and then are doing internships, because there are internships, not the ICON ones, there are internships that are post-graduation that are unpaid, and I think that is a really difficult issue. I did notice, I think that you mentioned that there could become a point, particularly in these economic climate, that industry might start charging the training institutions for those placements. Well, that would be completely drastic, because there simply would be the inability of training courses. I think I can speak probably for UCL as well, to in any way actually formally pay for those placements.
Just kick in. 27 years at Manchester Museum, we often took students, we often took placements. It took months before we started to make a profit out of the effort that we had put in for training the students. It is really time consuming. We have to supervise them. We can't trust them. They don't know the systems. It takes a long time to get them up to speed. And that is a real cost. It means we are not doing something else. And so the point who do we charge? And actually, we charge the student, because the time they're working after they start making a profit is the time when they're repaying. And up to that, and then they go, and we've lost them. And if they go at the point at which they suddenly make the movement from loss to profit, and they go at that point, it's a complete loss to us. Really useful. We've done it's really good for our soul, and it's really bad for the institution.
There's one question here in the centre, and then we'll move up to the middle of the front.
Hi, I'm Sarah Van Snick from the National Archives here in the UK, and I just wanted to pose a question that's perhaps a bit outside of the box. I'd like to know what skills you think can be gained outside the profession and brought back in for those students who, for reasons of money or time or whatever it happens to be, cannot manage to get their first job in a conservation studio or in a museum or gallery or archive.
Can I comment on that? One of the things that I think, speaking for myself, we don't do well enough is management, budgeting, those kinds of skills. And partly we don't do it well enough. We haven't got the scope and time to fit it into our training courses. But that, I think, is a gap. And that's one area, I think, and you could you could definitely benefit from.
I'll continue that idea. One of the problems, one of the things that happens when you learn and you get more experience is that you get to know the complexity of things, and you couldn't possibly cope with the complexity of life when you come into the training, or even as you come out of it. A little bit of history. I managed a £22 million project at the Manchester Museum on the development, and I went to the British Museum and asked for them advice at the beginning, and they gave me some advice, and I didn't understand it because I hadn't been through the process to understand the advice that they were giving me. And on a much smaller scale, when you come out of university, you just have no concept of the complexities that you have to manage. It's really good to have some experience of other sorts of life, the complexities that apply to those, and then bring those back into conservation. That's for project management and for making your horizons go bigger.
Hi, I'm Larissa Allen. I'm a student at UMass Boston. I'm also employed by the National Park Service in the States as a student temporary employment position. So I actually get to get paid to do my job, which is great. It sounds like in the States we only have basically one undergrad program for conservation, and everything else is a master's program. And I'm wondering if that helps address the issues of glut that we were talking about by kind of weeding out less interested undergrad students. And if you think that that's a positive benefit or negative, or if you think it's better to get people involved earlier or wait until they're a little bit more mature and have actually already gone through. I know that in the States we generally require an art history and chemistry minor. What you think about that?
I think that's a really interesting observation, because when I ran an undergraduate program in books, but the interesting thing is that the majority of the students, because they wanted to do book conservation, actually came as graduates. And by and large, there are some outstanding exceptions. One of them is in the room. By and large, the students that made the best students were clearly the students who already came with a degree. So I think that your observation of saying that, I mean, of course it's sad that in an ideal world there would be undergraduate, but I do think, because you're wanting students at a really high calibre, because as you all know from having started conservation or already been graduates, it does call upon a high intellectual, practical ability. And so for that reason, I do think a postgraduate program, certainly speaking from my personal experience, I do think that that is the best way of providing conservation. And having that slight weeding out quality that you were pointing out, even though it's sad at some levels, I think it is on the whole a really positive thing.
Can I say, I have the same experience when we were teaching at undergraduate level. A very large number of our students came in as graduates. They discovered conservation was what they wanted to do from perhaps having done something else, sometimes very different before. And they made very strong applicants and very strong students.
I would add a note of sympathy to you, though, given the cost of going through university and then having to go through the cost of a master's course, which isn't cheap. So in a real world, that is a major factor to think about.
Unfortunately, the weeding is done not by interest, it's as much by money. And that, I don't know how it applies in the States, but in this country, masters are mostly self-funded nowadays, aren't they? Very few grants.
Quite a lot of them are, yeah.
And so it means that somehow or other you have to generate the funds to do this.
And then get an unpaid internship.
Sorry?
And then get an unpaid internship.
and we're talking about widening diversity, and it really narrows it.
Which is why I talked about earlier on about the fact that the Museum of London, we've done some very, very interesting volunteer programs which loosely could be called collections care, and these have actually won awards, international awards, for the fact that we've tried to include the dispossessed, the people from variety of backgrounds, some haven't got jobs, and we've actually got these people involved with repackaging archaeological items in our stores. We've got 17 kilometres of items to repackage. So, you know, it is a way of doing that. In fact, we do give them a small amount of financial help as well. But that does take a lot of time to organise and to supervise as well. We have, I think it's 2, possibly 3 people involved with those projects each time we run them.
Can we turn Alison's Richmond question back to you? What would make your life possible to become conservators? What methodology would you like to see, whether it's practicable or not? What do you need, at your stage, for taking the next step? What are the barriers that do you have? And there's no good just saying money. What are the barriers that you have, because no one's going to provide it except you? What barriers are in the way that could be cleared which should be cleared to make the process much more sensible? It will never be easy. There have always been far more people wanting to do conservation than ever can get in it. So there will always be quite an attrition rate. What would make it more sensible? What would make the process more sensible? I don't need an answer now, not like the other one, which I still haven't got an answer to. But think about it for tomorrow. When the discussions come up tomorrow, think about what plans that you would like to see, because we can preach at you from the cows come home, but we'll be gone in a few years. We'll have fallen off the perch. It'll be down to you. You might as well think about it now.
Hi, Liz Ralph from Camberwell. Just going back to the point that you made, Belson, it seems like you're quite resentful of the students that you had in your museum at some point, and actually students can pick up on that, which makes it quite uncomfortable to work in places where people realise that the people who are training them don't have the time to help them. And it feels like, in some cases, that you're obviously taking time out of their busy workplace and work schedule for them to help you, which is what we need. We need that help to go forward. Would it not be a good idea to set aside some of the budget for museums to put it towards training new members of staff or training students to come in for work placements, so that can be got rid of?
It wasn't resentment. The resentment was for the students who did slope off halfway through. The students who stayed, most of them went into the profession, and I'm really proud of them. The ones who went off, who took and didn't give back, were the ones that I'm resentful of, in retrospect.
But would it not be a good idea for institutions to have in their budget some time set aside for that, for the training of students to come in and do work placements?
Be wonderful.
I think a lot of places do. Like I think like the
Yes,
Hall and the British Library, the National Archives, but like I was saying before, we utterly are dependent. We are totally dependent on the support of the museums. The difficulty is that museums themselves have had huge, as much as the training institutions, museums themselves have experienced huge funding cuts. So for them to actually set aside specific budgets is becoming increasingly difficult. But by and large, certainly in my terms of, I'm just talking being London-based, the generosity of institutions has been absolutely extreme. I wouldn't even like to start picking out institutions because it would mean that I left out others. I think by and large, I mean, you do get, some people are not so keen, obviously, but by and large, museum professionals realise that in order for us to have a vibrant, ongoing conservation community, we're utterly dependent on those workplace experiences.
Hi, I'm Amanda Eyre. I'm from the University of Lincoln. In answer to in trying to answer your question, Belson, about what I would want to see as an international student, I mean, I pay almost 3 times what, UK or EU students pay, and I mean, it's a struggle to pay that, but I would still be willing to pay a little extra if my course included an internship. If in some way that could be worked out, I would pay for that, because that's invaluable experience. you really need
I agree.
it.
My name is Yuzin, and I'm painting conservator in Hampton Car Institute. I might change the subject completely. I wanted to know if there is anywhere I can get the guideline to set up own company, like which insurance we could, what is like possibility of insurance we can get, and what kind of like aspect of law, legal things that we have to go through, and that kind of thing.
I'm outside my comfort zone, so I've worked mostly in institutions. But there are a number of, there have been, they may have been stopped, but there are a number of initiatives to support small companies. And these are run through banks and they run through other things. You know better than I.
Thank you. This is Barbara Borghese. I'm the editor of News in Conservation and an independent paper Conservator. In answering what you were asking for, it's not necessarily related only to conservation, but in fact the British Library, the Business Centre, they run free workshops to help you set up your own company, which I myself have used when I set up my own independent, and they're really good, and they're available, and it's everything free. So we pay through our taxes for that, use it, just go and use it. So it's not specific to conservation, but a business is a business. Most of the requirement will be there, and you will have to use them. So, and other things about, for example, insurance, etc. There are information that you can find and you can apply, even on talking to other private conservators.
Okay, we have time for one more question, one last question. I think there was someone in the back, maybe? No? Change? Time with front. Here we go.
Hi, Melanie Keeble. I'm currently an ICON intern at the British Museum. I was just wondering, this part actually, in answer to your question, Velsen, but also something I was wondering as well, is do you think it would be possible for discussion between different institutions that actually teach conservation to students about the definition of what would go into an undergraduate course as opposed to what would go into a master's? Because I came straight from my A-levels to do, it's a bit based on my personal experience, I came straight from my A-levels to do an undergraduate course because I knew that conservation was something I was very passionate about and I definitely wanted to do. I did go on to do a master's, but it was very restrictive about what masters I could do because there was so much overlap between things that are taught at the undergraduate and things that are taught at the masters, because you've got people coming in from different backgrounds and everything. So do you think it would be possible to actually discuss between institutions and actually develop that definition?
Can I comment on that briefly? About, I don't know how long ago, rather a long time ago, we actually, in the predecessor of ICON, the UKIC, we defined a basic syllabus for various, one was a sort of fundamental syllabus, and then on top of that there were additional bits for different specialisms. But one of the difficulties is that each of our institutions will want to have a view on what we teach. They're not going to be terribly receptive to the idea that we actually all teach the same thing. I think our best hope is at the accreditation level, which is how professionals generally work. My daughter is an architect, for instance. Her learning stage was very varied. She was at different universities through her learning stage. But the accreditation is at a sort of universal level, and that is the same with many professions. I see your problem, but I don't see that we can realistically have a kind of standard syllabus at that level, I'm afraid. Our basic syllabus didn't catch on, in other words.
All right then, well, thank you all. I think you should give yourselves a round of applause, please, and our speakers today.